Good evening, and welcome to this fourth edition of the Poets Corner. It is the second week of March 2011. I am your host, Micah Joel Toohey, and I am recording from Western Illinois University, WIU, in Macomb, Illinois. First, I would like to start with Langston Hughes. One of my favorite works of Langston Hughes, aside from his jazz poetry, is his famous poem entitled Hope. It's very short, but very powerful in its poignancy. Hope. Sometimes when I'm lonely, don't know why, keep thinking I won't be lonely by and by. Langston Hughes. Interesting how hope, as Langston Hughes expresses it, is an expression for wanting to be with someone else, wanting someone else to come into his life. And that translates very, very well to Langston Hughes' very famous short story, which is entitled Salvation, which I'm going to share with you tonight. Langston Hughes' short story Salvation greatly affected me in my own life. And so, tonight I'm not only going to share with you Langston Hughes' short story, Salvation, but also my reaction to it as I share with you my experience that I get from some pieces of scrap paper I wrote way back when. Salvation, Langston Hughes. I was saved from sin when I was going on 13. But not really saved. It happened like this. There was a big revival at my Auntie Reed's church. Every night for weeks there had been much preaching, singing, praying, and shouting, and some very hardened sinners had been brought to Christ, and the membership of the church had grown by leaps and bounds. Then, just before the revival ended, they held a special meeting for the children, to bring the young lambs to the fold. My aunt spoke of it for days ahead. That night I was escorted to the front row and placed on the mourner's bench with all the other young sinners who had not yet been brought to Jesus. My aunt told me that when you were saved you saw light and something happened to you inside, and Jesus came into your life, and God was with you from then on. She said you could see and hear and feel Jesus in your soul. I believed her. I had heard a great many old people say the same thing, and it seemed to me they ought to know. So I sat there calmly in the hot, crowded church waiting for Jesus to come to me. The preacher preached a wonderful, rhythmical sermon, all moans and shouts and lonely cries and dire pictures of hell. Then he sang a song about the 99 safe in the fold, but one little lamb was left out in the cold. Then he said, won't you come to Jesus? Young lambs, won't you come? And he held out his arms to all of us young sinners there on the mourner's bench. And the little girls cried. And some of them jumped up and went to Jesus right away, but most of us just sat there. A great many old people came and knelt around us and prayed, old women with jet black faces and braided hair, old men with work-gnarled hands, and the church sang a song about the lower lights are burning, some poor sinners to be saved, and the whole building rocked with prayer and song. Still, I kept waiting to see Jesus. Finally, all the young people had gone to the altar and were saved, but one boy and me. He was a rounder's son named Wesley. Wesley and I were surrounded by sisters and deacons praying. It was hot in the church and getting late now. Finally Wesley said to me in a whisper, "Oh God, oh damn, I'm tired of sitting here. Let's get up and be saved." So we got up and was saved. Then I was left all alone on the mourner's bench. My aunt came and knelt at my knees and cried while prayers and songs swelled all around me in the little church. The whole congregation prayed for me alone in a mighty wail of moans and voices. And I kept waiting serenely for Jesus, waiting, but he didn't come. I wanted to see him, but nothing happened to me. Nothing! I wanted something to happen to me, but nothing happened. I had heard the songs of the minister saying, "Why don't you come? My dear child, why don't you come to Jesus? Jesus is waiting for you. He wants you. Why don't you come? Sister Reed, what is this child's name?" Langston, my aunt sobbed. "Langston, why don't you come? Why don't you come and be saved? Oh, Lamb of God, why don't you come?" Now it was getting really late. I began to be ashamed of myself holding everything up so long. I began to wonder what God thought about Wesley, who certainly hadn't seen Jesus either, but who was now sitting proudly on the platform, swinging his knickerbocker legs and grinning down at me, surrounded by deacons and old women on their knees praying. God had not struck Wesley dead for taking his name in vain or lying in the temple. So I decided that maybe to save further trouble I'd better lie too, to say that Jesus had come to get up and be saved. So I got up. Suddenly the whole room broke into a sea of shouting, and they saw me rise. Waves of rejoicing swept the place. Women leapt in the air. My aunt threw her arms around me. The minister took me by the hand and led me to the platform. When things quieted down in a hushed silence punctuated by a few ecstatic amens, all the new young lambs were blessed in the name of God. Then joyous singing filled the room. That night, for the last time in my life but one, for I was a big boy, 12 years old, I cried. I cried in bed alone and couldn't stop. I buried my head under the quilts, but my aunt heard me. She woke up and told my uncle I was crying because the Holy Ghost had come into my life and because I had seen Jesus. But I was really crying because I couldn't bear to tell her that I had lied, that I had deceived everybody in the church, that I hadn't seen Jesus. And now I didn't believe there was a Jesus anymore, since he didn't come to help me. Such a powerful piece by Langston Hughes. I remember reading this. I remember being stunned. Sometimes in philosophy class at Western we philosophically argue about the existence of God or the problem of evil or whether or not miracles really happen, but the real objection, the human objection, was put right in my face by Langston Hughes. For a long time, that passage haunted me, and I thought about it. I felt in my life I had experienced God, but not everyone had. I learned in philosophy class, reading David Hume, about what's called the principle of induction. The principle of induction basically says we think that things will be in the future how they've been in the past. If we drop a rock, it falls to the ground. If we do it 3 times it'll fall to the ground. And after a while, we learn that if a certain thing goes a certain way one way, it's likely it'll do so again. We learn over time from everything that's happened before that every time we let go of that rock will fall to the ground. I'd had a different experience in my life. I thought I'd seen Jesus in various ways. I'm a Roman Catholic, and I believe that every Sunday I receive Jesus on my tongue. More than that, actually. I'm one of those conservative types who can't seem to stay away from daily Mass more than a couple of days. But then there was Langston. Sometime in the church. And where was Jesus for Langston? It was an interesting question. As I thought about it, I began wondering, how would people feel about me if I were different? What if I lost my faith? What if I didn't believe anymore? Would people still be there for me in the same way? Would they still look at me and see an image of God even if I didn't believe in God anymore? Did their love come as a consequence of me believing in Jesus? Or was it a consequence of me being me? I had to know. So I started asking friends about this. I remember the first friend I ever asked, Kathleen Chandler. I asked her if she'd still love me if I were an atheist. She told me she would. It was a relief. I love Kathleen. She's always been a good friend. She told me it didn't matter if I didn't believe in Jesus. It didn't matter. She loved me. And because of Jesus in her life, she would always love me. And that got me to thinking again. Do they love me because of me, or do they love me because of Jesus? At the time, it never even occurred to me that the two might not be mutually exclusive. I asked other friends, would you still love me if I were an atheist? I asked my brother David. I asked my friend Dan Little. I asked my friend Chris Nelson. I wanted to ask my friend the priest, Charles Clement, but never quite got up the nerve. It wasn't that I thought he wouldn't love me anymore. It had more to do with the fact that his answer I knew would be of course, but what brought this on? When I wasn't sure how to properly phrase all the things that were leading up to the question. I wasn't so much thinking about me. I was thinking about what it meant to be human, what it meant to be free, what it meant to be a theist or an atheist or a believer or a non-believer. What does it mean? How am I to live? How am I to be? It wasn't for a long time that I finally got up the nerve to ask a group of people, would you still love me if I were an atheist? Believe me, it's not an easy question to ask a group of Christians gathered around for coffee cake and sharing good tidings. I remember they looked at me. Sometimes I think when someone asks that, the first instinct is to respond to the question with another question. That question being, have you lost your faith? First question being, seeing where my faith was rather than answering my question, would you still love me if I were an atheist? Sometimes people get defensive about their faith, and the first thing they want to do is get someone back into the fold, get back into line with their thinking before bothering to answer my question. Here I was as a human being in desperate need of reassurance and affirmation of my humanity. That was what I was expecting, but it wasn't what I received. In that moment of vulnerability before my friends, would you still love me if I were an atheist? They looked at me and just said yes. They said yes rather plainly without pursuing the question further, because to them the possibility of not doing so just hadn't bothered to come to mind. I wished Langston hadn't felt so pressured to see Jesus. I wished Langston could have been there with the church that I had been with that day, because I had a new realization. My new realization was that I was loved whether or not I had any faith. Maybe that realization is the beginning of faith. This new experience defied the principle of induction, that the future will always resemble the past, because I was confronted with something new in the present of the present, of the one who is now. Welcome among friends, hiding not without conform or compromise. I found myself welcome among these sinner saints, and here I witnessed divinized humanity. My reason breathless but still intact, the eyes of my heart saw the New Jerusalem, gold spires with pennants of blue gleaming above the gates of pearl, as night came to distant earth. All is well. Safely rest. God is nigh. Let all mortal flesh keep silence. And the Poet's Corner will be
right back.